Coming this evening for the November 1st, 2022 Louisville City Council meeting. I'm Mayor Ashley Stolzman, and if our city clerk could please do a roll call for us.
Mayor Stolzman?
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Maloney?
Here.
Councilmember Brown?
Here.
Councilmember Dickinson?
Here.
Councilmember Fahey?
Here.
Councilmember Lay?
Here.
Councilmember Most?
Here.
Thank you, everyone. If you'll please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, everyone. Could I get a motion to approve the agenda?
Motion to approve the agenda?
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you. Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you, everyone. The motion carries. That takes us to public comments on items that are not on our agenda or items that only appear on our consent agenda. So if any members of the public would care to comment on something that's not on our agenda, please, if you're participating via Zoom, go ahead and raise your hand, clicking the raise hand icon at the bottom of the screen. This is for items that are not on our agenda or only on our consent agenda. And then if you're in person, please fill out a sign-up card so that we can get your name correct in the record. First this evening, we have Nick Callan. And each person, when they come up, if you tell us your name and then tell us what town you live in, and you'll have 3 minutes to tell us what you'd like to tell us.
Thank you. My name is Nick Callan. I'm here representing myself and my family. We live at 967 West Yale Court on Dahlia between Fireside and Cherry. Would like to bring to the council and the city planner's attention the need for speed control and crosswalks on Dahlia, particularly south of Fireside through where Cherry is and even beyond, frankly. There was a very recent accident between a car and a bike that has really underscored the importance of this issue for us and for those that live in that area. Lots of children walk and bike to school, of course. There's a lot of pedestrian traffic in that area. While most cars obey the speed limit daily, I see cars because we face the speed limit sign that clocks the cars going north. We see speeds going between 30 and 35 miles per hour. Just today, my wife saw somebody going 34 coming from the school. Again, it's downhill. But there's nothing, again, slowing the speeds from there. There's a curve right at the, heading south towards Cherry. Cars are still going too fast. This has been something that's been on the city's radar I'm very well aware of for many, many years. This is something I'd still like to continue to bring to their attention. We're requesting additional speed calming measures as well as crosswalks in that particular area because there are no crosswalks south of Fireside. We realize that the city has done a very good job adding crosswalks along that corridor and many other areas for pedestrian safety, and we applaud that. We'd like to ask for these additional measures. My wife got passed by a car driving on Dahlia. We saw that also happen another time. People are just driving too fast. There's a lot more traffic. From the previous traffic study, Dahlia Polk is one of the most heavily used neighborhood streets. It's likely a cut through to Dillon, right, for people heading across town. We spoke with our ward reps, used to be Susan Liu, now Deb and Maxine last year, and again this year. I brought this to the attention of the city council via Zoom last year. Of course, we had a fire, so there was a lot happening between then and now, but I'd like to bring it up again. We'd request an additional measure, like what was, for example, put in on Washington. There's a school up there. They do have speed humps, as well as a speed limit sign. There are other things that can be done. Our kids go to school in Boulder, and there's on the streets, they have put in, kind of like the pedestrian signs that are drilled into place, some areas that kind of skew traffic a little bit. They're plastic kind of pipes that stick up. So these are things you don't have to spend a lot. You have to do some painting, of course, to do that. But I really think the speed calming measures, the speed bumps are one of the things that are going to prevent people from driving through. Again, we'd like to make it less attractive for a cut through to head over to Dillon. We drove across Washington. And I said to myself, boy, I have to go a little slow over the humps. I'm probably less likely to go this way, frankly. That, to me, is a long-term issue for the Delacopolia corridor, as well as even further south of Cherry, to make that less attractive. Again, I'd like to thank you for your time listening to this. And again, we're really just saddened to hear about 2 children getting hit on their bikes. There's lots of traffic. We understand there's growth. I think the city is being responsible about the growth, but this is an issue that continues to need attention. Thank you.
Next, we have Jen Gardner.
Hi, thank you for taking the time to listen to me. I'm the mother of the children that were hit, and I want to tell you how it happened because we were in the middle of the crosswalk. As we were on Madison approaching Dahlia, I saw the truck coming around the bend. I gave my girls the instructions to take it outside, for one, to take an outside wide turn, because there's a thorny bush on that corner, and if you don't go wide, you're gonna go straight into the bush. So she took a wide turn, or she was instructed to take a wide turn. And I told my little one to take an inside left turn because she was learning to ride the road. And I was gonna sandwich her in when I was finished being crossing guard. I rolled into the intersection. I got off my bike and placed my feet firmly on the ground. And then I went like this. When I tried to make eye contact, I realized that he wasn't gonna stop. He didn't see me. 2 hands on the wheel, eyes straight forward. I turned to my right to see my kid, to scream at her, and I just watched it happen. And then I felt the air of the truck pass me by, and then my little one was hit on the inside. We can all agree that safe routes to school are necessary. I have walked and biked every single route to our school. I can show you signs, no trespassing signs. I can show you fences, all the things that we do to keep kids on this main street. Like, why? When they can take the back road. My husband was like, don't get emotional. How do you not get emotional? What I'd like to see happen is not just this intersection be expected, but across the city. All of our kids need a safe route to school. And I know that this particular intersection has a blind curve and a dip in the road. And in the winter, that dip builds ice. And so we just have an accident waiting to happen. I hope that my kids are okay. They have stitches and bruises, and they'll be okay. We're have therapy next week for the trauma of it. And both of them want to get on their bike again, thank God. And both of them have gone through crosswalks again. And it took some courage, especially last night, where kids are dashing across that street in the dark, you know? What I'd like to see happen is an assessment. I'd like to see stop signs and speed bumps and flashing lights before the curve that says there's a stop sign coming, because it's a blind curve and people go straight through, and it is a cut through. And with that, I want to thank everyone who showed up. I mean, post-fire, I knew this community was amazing. We show up for each other. But the EMTs and the school and the parents, I have never been so seen in my life. Thank you.
Thank you. Next we have, and I apologize, but we can't have cheering or booing because we want everyone to feel comfortable saying whatever they want to this evening. So there are several topics that we'll get to this evening that people might have very differing views on, and we just want everyone to feel comfortable to tell us whatever they'd like to. Next we have airing closet.
Hi, my name is Aaron Closette, and I live in Louisville. So I live next to Jen Gardner, and that intersection where her children were hit is one that I cross every day walking my kids to school. And that day I had left early, and I came upon the accident afterwards, and I saw her, and I was extremely worried because I've crossed that intersection, more than 100 times walking my kids to school. And I, at least once a week, with my kids, my 2 daughters, walking them to school across that intersection, I see cars coming through around that curve, and they don't see the pedestrians. We're standing, in the street, waiting for cars to stop, and they don't stop. They just blast right through. It's not just men, it's women, it's teenagers, it's everybody, because that intersection is one where drivers do not expect to see people. They're not looking for pedestrians, even though there's a crosswalk and that little yellow yield sign that says, Colorado state law, yield to pedestrians in the crosswalk. And so it's not enough. The measures that are there right now are not enough. So the fact that once a week I fear for the lives of my children trying to get to school is very uncomfortable. And so seeing my neighbor with her children coming back from that, it hit home. So what I would like to see is at a minimum, a stop sign at that intersection. Make it a 4-way stop so that everyone has to come to a complete stop so that people can get across and that the drivers are forced to come to a complete stop. That's the problem, is that the drivers are not stopping at that intersection. Other measures like speed humps or flashing lights would be helpful, but a stop sign is so cheap and it would literally save children's lives. The fact that this happened is not an accident. It's not a one-off event. It could happen every day of every week of every year. And it's a miracle that it hasn't happened sooner. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other comments on items that are not on our agenda this evening? Next in the queue, we have RJ Harrington.
Good evening, Council. RJ Harrington, 457 East Retreat Court. And I want to echo everything that folks just spoke about regarding traffic. I purposely drive the speed limit around town, and my vehicle is a traffic calming device when I am driving the speed limit. Most importantly, on Campus Drive. Our son just got recently licensed, and when one drives the speed limit on Campus Drive, one is an accident waiting to happen. Folks are driving 50 to 60 miles per hour on that particular route. But importantly, I wanted to make comment tonight on item D on the consent agenda. Full disclosure, RJ Harrington, I was a member of the Bowman team that was not selected, but I want to applaud our city, our council, most importantly, our staff with Kayla, our sustainability person, on lead for pursuing an internal decarbonization plan. McKinstry is going to do incredible work for the city, and I thoroughly applaud the selection of that outfit to do this work. But again, most importantly, a decarbonization plan for our community, now granted for city facilities, but it's a very important step in aligning what we need to do as a city, as a community, to decarbonize and to not only work on traffic calming, but pollution calming to support our children and their biosphere. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other members of the public care to comment on items that are not on our agenda? Just while I'm waiting for any final hands to pop up, we have council comments after the consent agenda, so if you just stick around, that's the way our agenda is set up. Any others? All right, seeing none, next on our agenda is the consent agenda. Could I get a motion to approve?
Thank you.
I think I
I
heard
will second that, and if I get an
Great.
opportunity, I'd like to make a few comments on the consent agenda, Mayor.
Mayor Pro
Thank you.
Tem Maloney.
Thank you. You know, we sometimes, and we quickly go by the consent agenda, and, you know, I think it's important to acknowledge the efforts of staff and the efforts of maintaining and promoting our city policies. So I'd like to start off, I don't know if Austin is here, Austin Brown, and former finance director Kevin Watson were really responsible for a lot of the work we did on the Louisville Revitalization Commission budget, and it's something that I think has a lot of positives. But I also want to thank the Louisville Revitalization Commissioners, Councilor Lay, who serves on that on behalf of the council. But the budget that we have is very solid. It's very forward-thinking. You know, and it aligns very closely with the intent of our urban revitalization district. And I certainly look forward to future meetings as we go into this next 10 years where we'll have a lot of funding there. And we need to be looking at investments in there that serves the city in the long term. And I'd also like to comment on the, as RJ Harrington just did, thank you for your comments, on the internal carbonization plan. I want to thank Kayla Betzel. I think I got that right. But there were several other directors who worked on that as well as staff. But we're looking at something that is something we all appreciate, we all support, which is really very much climate sustainability. And if we can't show as an example the city facilities first and show how it can be done and show the success, then it's hard for us to require that of anybody else. But you know, the approach that we're taking, I think, is very important because it's quantifying Our footprint, our greenhouse gas footprint with a roadmap and an approximation of what those costs are going to be over time. So somebody whose term limit has one more year, this project won't be done, but I encourage my colleagues going forward to very much look at the capital budget and looking at doing things according to the roadmap that make the most sense and have the most impact for reducing greenhouse gases. So that's my charge to my colleagues going forward. But then again, I want to thank staff for their work on this. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Any other comments on consent agenda? Councilmember Lay.
Thanks, Mayor. By the way, I'm appearing by Zoom because I got exposed to COVID-19 over the weekend, and I want to make sure to not spread whatever I might be carrying. I wanted to say, sort of echo the Mayor Pro Tem's comments about the LRC budget. I appreciate the kudos, but the commission is obviously acting together when we presented that budget, and staff did terrific work on that. Lexi Adler, as our chair, has done a terrific job. So I'm going to make sure credit goes where credit is due all the way around. And also, kind of echo RJ Harrington's comments a minute ago. I wanted to take just a second just about his comments in particular, because I appreciate his full disclosure, but because of that full disclosure, frankly, I've even more confidence because I appreciate RJ's abilities in the area that we're dealing with here, and so his endorsement of a rival firm to do the work, and knowing that they're good outfit, I think helps. And I appreciate everybody on staff who's worked on that as well. So thanks.
Thank you so much. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Thank you, everyone. The consent agenda is approved. That takes us to our council informational comments on pertinent items not on the agenda. Just want to thank everybody for coming out and sharing your topics tonight. Sometimes with the first time you comment at a council meeting, it's odd that the council doesn't respond, but the things aren't agenda'd, and we only talk about topics that are on the agenda. But I just want everybody to know that we are really committed to traffic safety. Hopefully you've seen a lot of improvements over the last several years, and when we hear from people, we continue to try to make improvements. And on a later topic tonight on our agenda, we have our legislative agenda, and one of the topics that's come up is speed enforcement by technology through cameras and things like that. And in other areas, they've really seen a tremendous impact on reducing and actually eliminating speeding by using this type of technology. So we have that for discussion tonight, but there will definitely be more to come about continuing to improve areas and see what we can do to improve safety for our bicyclists, our pedestrians, our routes to school, and everybody who's using our facilities. So thank you for those comments tonight. I'm sure other people will want to comment on that as well in their council informational comments, but I told some community members I would make an announcement during my council informational comments. So I just need to pull it up. There is a community group that is putting on a performance. It's called Spark, and it's local folks, and it will be, it's open to everyone in the community. It's hosted at Ascent Community Church, but it's open to everyone, and it's reflecting on the year that we've had together, as the name suggests, and it should be a beautiful choral event. And does anyone know the date? November 11th, is that right? In the evening. So everyone's invited to that. Other folks have council comments? Councilmember Brown.
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to thank the neighbors from Ward 3 and throughout the city who came to talk about safe routes to school. I think it's, I just want to echo the mayor to say how important this is to me personally, with kids at Fireside, walking that same route. I really, this is a priority for me, and I know that safe routes to school are a priority for this council. And we've made some real progress, including crosswalks and new sidewalks and hawk signals, but clearly we need to do more. Something like this can never happen ever again. And I just want to appreciate how brave it was, especially for Ms. Gardner to show up tonight and discuss the incident. It's just a remarkably scary event. So thank you to everybody, and just accept my commitment to continue to work on this.
Councilmember Lay?
Yeah, we have dealt with or had occasion to deal with traffic calming and kids' routes and paths, not just to school, but the paths that they go on every day across really busy streets. And we've had folks before, and I appreciate, though I'm not there, I know that there are a lot of people that have turned out for this particular um, reason, and I want to thank all of you, and know that this is both an issue that generates at sometimes certainly frustration and anger, but tears. And I'm really impressed that Jen Gardner came and spoke to us, because that certainly speaks volumes. We shouldn't wait, and hopefully, I think we will take some steps in the future to try to address the concerns that have been raised tonight and others as they show up. Another thing is, over the weekend, as some of you know, the ROC opened off of McCaslin to assist folks who've survived the fire. That's where the new, or excuse me, they're not entirely new, but the navigators that have been assigned to assist people are going to be located. And I invite folks to go on over there just to see what's been done. I certainly invite those who are survivors over there, because there's some good services and connections to services that I think can assist. So thanks to those who showed up, those who contributed. A lot of nonprofit groups contributed to that becoming a reality. So thanks again.
Thank you. Councilmember Most?
Yeah, I just want to reiterate what my fellow council members said about the safety issues. This is near and dear to my heart. My daughter is 17 now, but she basically took her life in her hands every day when she was crossing Washington Street to go to Coal Creek, and it took a really long time to get traffic calming, and a lot of people routinely complain about these measures. And what I hear is, well, nobody's gotten hurt yet. And to me, it's way too late when someone gets hurt, especially a child. So I appreciate everyone speaking out. And I know that Mr. Callan had come to our ward meeting, and I think because of the ward adjustments now, I think that's part of the reason Councilmember Brown spoke up, because that's actually his ward now. But the bottom line is, it doesn't matter whose ward it is, because providing safety for our children, especially when they're going to school, yes, all the time, I think is, a critical responsibility of this council. And so I look forward to working with my fellow council members to try to expedite any safety measures we can get in place, and whether those are, kind of short-term things to, try to make it better, and then sort of long-term strategically, how we're going to approach this in that neighborhood and across the community.
Councilmember Fahey?
Thank you. Yes, I will also echo my fellow council members' concern about the crossing on Dahlia. I have a granddaughter who crosses there to go to Fireside every morning and coming home every afternoon. And to think that her safety is at risk because of something that we haven't done is frankly terrifying for me. And in addition to being concerned about that, I also want to echo Councilor Lay's comments about the new location for the ROC. I visited there as someone who did lose their home, and they have wonderful resources, and it's a great new facility. They will help you with whatever assistance you need to rebuild.
Any other council comments this evening? Thanks, everyone. That takes us to our city manager's report. City Manager Durbin.
Thank you, Mayor. I have a few items for you. First, I wanted to make sure council was aware of this accident, and now you are. And I also wanted to inform you that the police chief and public works director and I have already initiated conversations about what we can do over there and elsewhere in the community. So we're already having conversations about that, and we may want to follow up with some of the folks who spoke tonight with hearing their ideas as well. So I just wanted to report that to you. Second, I wanted to make sure everybody knew that the FLA, the Facilitated Learning Analysis, has been released. You can find that on our Rebuild page on our website. It tells a lot about what happened on December 30th and shortly thereafter. The city fully participated in that work, and we're reviewing it thoroughly and looking for lessons learned, working hard on mitigation and coordinating with other jurisdictions to do everything we can to make sure something like that doesn't happen in our community again, or elsewhere for that matter. And on the rebuild side, I'm pleased to report that we have 150 building permit applications at this point for rebuilds. 80 of those have been issued, so 80 active permits. And we've remained committed to a 2-week turnaround on our internal review time. Now, you may hear stories about it took me 6 weeks or 5 weeks or 7 weeks. If you hear those concerns, we're happy to look into them. What we can't control is their turnaround time responding to our comments sometimes. But we're committed to our turnaround time, 2 weeks or less. Also pleased to report that all of the use tax credits for building permits that have already been issued have been processed. So that's good news as well for folks who already paid for their permits. In some good news, thank you, Louisville Rising. They're putting together on November 19th between noon and 3 over at the Louisville Middle School, Police versus Fire Dodgeball, which should be a fun event to help support all of our first responders. So it would be the Sheriff's Office representing unincorporated as well as Superior, and Louisville Police and Louisville Fire as well as Mountain View. Last and certainly not least, I would like to introduce our new interim finance director, Vic Runkle, who's over here sitting next to Rob. She'll be with us through the transition. She has a lot of experience and a lot of experience with interim roles as well. So if you haven't had a chance to sit down and visit with her, please do. And she's going to help us steady the ship and keep things moving. Bills getting paid. That's all I have, Mayor.
Thank you very much. Welcome. Thank you so much for being here. All right, any questions for the city manager? Seeing none, thank you all for coming. That takes us to our first item of regular business this evening. Our first item of business is ordinance number 1843, series 2022, an emergency ordinance providing for a temporary moratorium on the submission, acceptance, processing, or approval of any building permit or land use application, or issuance of special use permit related to the use of property within the city as a gasoline service station or an automobile service station. This is our first and final reading and public hearing. The discussion tonight will be about the possible adoption of an emergency ordinance or first reading if we don't take up the emergency ordinance and do it as a first reading instead. And then if that's the case, we would set our public hearing for 11/15/2022, but we'll discuss all those things in just one moment. I'll open the public hearing. And I will turn it over to our city attorney, Kathleen Kelly, to just sort of frame the conversation for us.
Thank you, Mayor. As you stated in your packet, you have two versions of a draft ordinance that would impose a temporary moratorium until September 30th, 2023 on issuance of any sort of land use approval or building permits for construction of a new gas station within the city. The purpose of a temporary moratorium is really just to pause applications while the city council reviews an issue, takes up an issue. In this case, we do have an initiative petition that the city clerk has approved the form of that proposes an initiated ordinance that would prohibit gas stations in all zone districts within the city and would also prevent issuance of building permits for any gas station, new gas station, or remodeling or expansion of an existing gas station if it's within 2.5 miles of an existing gas station. So the draft ordinance before you is really modeled in order to hit that pause button and maintain the status quo in the way that that initiative petition has been presented. Now, of course, all of these issues are up to the City Council for your consideration. Whether to adopt the moratorium or not, whether to do so on an emergency basis or not, whether to include all the types of applications that have been included in the draft ordinance. And I'm happy to answer questions and help you through that discussion as I'm able.
Thank you so much, Director Zaccaro. Was there anything you wanted to add? All right.
No, thank you.
Thank you so much. So are there any questions from council members before we go to public comment? Mayor Pro Tem Maloney.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Attorney Kelly. The one question I have, and I'm not sure I'm clear on, so if we have an existing gas station, I heard the term expand, and I understand if they wanted to expand from, say, 4 to 6 or whatever, that's a change in that site. But what about maintenance? What about maintaining the current facility? Would they be able to do that under this moratorium?
They should. Those activities shouldn't require a building permit. And so it's only the application for a building permit or an application for any type of land use approval that the city would not receive during the moratorium.
Okay, so it could be a building permit that doesn't change, say, the number of fill stations. Maybe they want to move them or something, and that would require a building permit. But it wouldn't really change the use of that particular facility. Would that be true?
I don't know if that's true or not, whether a building permit would be required for that kind of activity.
Could the Director of Community Development?
Yeah, there could be some activities that wouldn't necessarily expand the gas station, like you mentioned, relocating. Now that could require a PUD amendment though, because when you're relocating structures, I think that would require a PUD amendment. But another example might be re-roof. Like we would require a building permit if they wanted to replace their roof, which would be maybe a standard maintenance activity.
But, and I guess I just looked at the specific language, and it is construction, expansion, reconstruction, or relocation. So building permits could not be issued for any of those activities.
So if they had a, most of these have some type of roofing over the open area. So if they had to reconstruct that, would that be reconstruction under the, I don't know who's going to answer that question. So.
So I'd have to think about what we mean by reconstruction here. I mean, they would be, it would be rare that they'd have to reconstruct the roof canopy. Usually you're just maintaining it or changing out part of the structure. So I'm not sure of the intent of that maybe that's something that needs some edits to make sure that someone, like if there was an accident, for example, and that canopy was destroyed and needed to be rebuilt, then maybe that's something that would be considered as an allowance. It wouldn't be a full reconstruction of the whole facility.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Councilmember Most.
Yeah, I just want some clarification about the timing, I guess. And from what I read, I understood that the timing of this, the moratorium until September 30th, was based on the timing of the potential initiative that's been started. Is that correct?
Yes. So as you may recall from the referendum process, the initiative process works similarly. If there are sufficient signatures gathered on the petition and the clerk declares the petition valid, then the next step is that proposed ordinance would come to the City Council for consideration, and the City Council can either adopt the ordinance as presented in the initiative petition, or refer it to the voters. So we looked at, what is the time frame that is going to allow all of the activities that could ensue from this initiative petition. And so I conferred with the city clerk, and she looked at the time frame for, they have X number of days to circulate, clerk has X number of days to review and declare it valid. And that's how we came up with, I think it was sometime in mid-September, we made it September 30th, just to be safe.
So that's looking at all the potential
Correct.
stacked on deadlines. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and that length of a moratorium is well within the duration of moratoriums that courts have uniformly determined to be valid tools for local governments to utilize when evaluating these types of matters.
Councilmember Dickinson?
Yeah, my question's about section 3. Says, the restrictions contained in this ordinance shall not be construed to affect any applications for a building permit, use by special review, or other land use approval for a gasoline station, gasoline service station, or automobile service station for which complete applications were filed prior to the effective date of this ordinance. So my question there, I'm just curious about, again, sort of a timing question. My understanding is the intent, I'm the one who brought this up a couple weeks ago. The intent was to prevent future things from entering the pipeline when we want to have a conversation about what we want. So I'm trying to understand section 3. Are things that are currently in the pipeline subject to the moratorium, or are things that are already in the pipeline not subject to the moratorium?
Well, as I informed the city council in the council communication, there is a land use application pending. That land use application would not be subject to the moratorium, but the building permit required to construct the facility, if that land use application were approved, would be subject to the moratorium. And again, that is a decision for the city council to make, whether that is how broad you want the moratorium, if you decide you want a moratorium at all. But the reason why that was included is because that best reflects the initiative petition that is being circulated. And so if the city council were desirous of maintaining the status quo with regard to that initiative petition, then it would include the building permit application. If the building permit application is not included in the moratorium, then a land use application currently in process would be able to obtain a building permit if the land use application were approved.
Thank you. This is maybe a question to Councilmember Dickinson, and so if you feel free to answer. But I'll start just kind of framing it a little bit. So I think it's hard sometimes for people watching council meetings to separate all of the different things into separate actions. But as a council member reflecting on them, it's actually quite easy to separate all the different decisions and think of things with different hats on. Because in some cases, we're sitting as quasi-judges. In some cases, it's a legislative matter. And so when we always agenda. We decide what do we want to put on our agenda. And Councilmember Dickinson asked if we wanted to have this on our agenda. And what I understood you to be wanting, and I'm very grateful of how staff drafted it because it leaves every option for us to discuss and make sure we get exactly what we want out there. But what I understood Councilmember Dickinson to be proposing to put on the agenda was a moratorium to keep new land use applications from entering the pipeline. So that's what I understood you to be proposing. And so I guess it would help, I think, clarify the discussion if that's what you're intending to put forward this evening, since this originated from you. And it's a whole group activity, so it's not like this lands on you, but that would be helpful to know. And then from my perspective, it wasn't clear to me that you were even aware of the initiative when you proposed the moratorium. I heard you make comments around, there's a lot of community members concerned about new applications coming in. So it seemed like it was actually not related to the initiative petition, but just trying to keep a future new application from coming in the pipeline. So if you could clarify that, I think that could help our discussion.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I think you have it pretty well. I did know about the petition, and I received a lot of emails, and my response to emails were like, I understand that the current application is bothersome. My understanding, that one's going to have to go by our current ordinances and things like that. And we're going to have to make a decision based on our current rules, but we could look at changing the rules for future things that come to us. If we don't like the rules we have, but the rules we have should be applied to the applications we're receiving as those rules exist. So I was definitely, my intention was to put a pause on future applications. And definitely didn't specify land use versus building permit versus what type of application. But what I meant was, let's not let more applications come in before we have a time to have a conversation about how we want to deal with this. That was definitely my intention. So if that answers your question.
Okay, and just, we can have a discussion and people can reflect on all the different possibilities that we can have. I just find that helpful to understand what the proposal, what you were hoping to do with the proposal. Other questions from folks or comments they want to make before public comment? Councilmember Lay. I see the little yellow hand better than your physical hand, just so you know.
I appreciate that. I was trying to reach for the one and I just got my hand in there. It's I think a question for either the clerk or the city attorney, or community development, but probably city attorney. Can you describe what the effect of the initiative would be on a current application, even one that's in the pipeline right now, if it were to be successful?
Sure. It would come down to an issue of timing. As is in the council communication, the public hearing on the pending land use application is November 15th, in just a few weeks. So we don't know the outcome of that. As the mayor said, that's an entirely different process, and it is a quasi-judicial proceeding, so we won't be discussing that land use application tonight. If the initiative petition may never be filed, if they don't gather enough signatures, we can't presume that that will happen. And we really can't presume any of the next steps that may happen after that. If the petition is filed and it has sufficient valid signatures, then the matter will come to the city council, and I don't know what the timing of that would be. There is a responsibility in the statutes for the city council to act promptly, but I can't foretell the timing of what would happen, and the timing will really determine whether there's an impact or not. Because the initiative ordinance, as drafted in the petition, would prevent issuance of a building permit. And so it just would come down to, has that been enacted at the time, before a building permit application is filed? And I don't know what that timing is.
Thank you.
Anything else from folks before we take public comment? All right, thank you. We have a few members who have signed up to comment. Anyone else is welcome to as well. There are sign-up cards in the hall, and just like we had earlier, when I call your name, please come up and tell us your name and the town you live in, and then tell us what you'd like to tell. You'll have 3 minutes each. First in the queue, we have Jeff Sheets.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the council. I've spoken with some of you about this issue. Candidly, pretty surprised when I saw this come out. And I won't talk about the application that comes up the 15th, although we are the landowner in that application. So that particular application has been in process for more than a year and was subject to unfortunately, the fire, and has been slowed down. But I'm speaking to you on behalf tonight of Coble & Company, myself, and we are the owners and the developers of Centennial Valley. We've been developing up there for over 3 decades. We bought the property in 1996. And although I understand on its face the moratorium appears that it would increase electric car usage, I don't really think this will have any effect on electric car usage. I think it's going to somewhat inconvenience those people that are driving gas cars. As I understand it from the statistics in the staff report, there's about 97% of Boulder County that drives a gas car, 3% drive electric. Statewide, it's about 99%, according to those statistics, that drive gas vehicles. It's difficult to reconcile this, as our company's been in business for 70 years, and we've built a strong reputation of working with communities. We value those relationships extremely. We hold them close. We do what we say we're going to do. We hope that the municipalities, again, would do what they say they're going to do. I think it's really unfortunate at this point that we're a couple weeks away from a hearing and the rules seem to be changing. I don't think that's fair. That's not how we do business. I hope the city wouldn't do business that way either. What I would ask tonight, if you're going to enact a moratorium, I would ask that you carve this out and not make this subject to that moratorium. Let it proceed on its own merit. Sit in front of council and let council, as the application is unfolded, make its own decision. So I appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next, we have Katie Doyle-Myers.
Good evening. I'm Katie Doyle-Myers from 425 Grouse Court in Louisville. And I was one of the community members who contacted council about the proposed application for the gas station. And while I have a lot of respect for the landowners and the business people who are involved with that application, I wanted to be able to have more time to better understand if adding another gas station in our city is the best that we can do. And I found it really interesting. I didn't know that the public comment was also going to include earlier today the accident that happened just a couple blocks from my home, and that was so much related to children's well-being and safety. And I actually think that this conversation is also about children's well-being and safety. When we talk about climate change, we know that fossil fuels and the use of fossil fuels are very much related to our changing climate. Science tells us that. And I think as a city, when we are making decisions about our planning, and I know it's a little bit different than our budgeting, but our budgeting and things like that, then we can be making decisions that also are aligned with our values about climate action and hopefully climate justice as well. And so I was part of initiating, I didn't know it was going to be a moratorium, but what it turned out to be. And so I do want to urge council to consider the moratorium. I was so pleased to hear the explanation of it, that it's really about hitting a pause button so that we can pause and learn more. I don't believe that a new gas station is appropriate as we are trying to address the climate crisis in our community that is right in our backyards, right in our former homes. We are interested, I am interested as a community member in investing to support the city of Louisville to transition to reduce our carbon footprint and creating jobs in the green energy sector. I know that not having another gas station doesn't equate to more electric vehicles, but I do think it helps put our decisions where our values are. I'm really interested in having more evidence about the need of another gas station. Do we actually need that in our community? Are people waiting in line or not being able to get the gas that they need in the moment that they need it in Louisville? So I think this pause button allows us to do more research, understand evidence of need, and to align our planning with our climate action goals that I know are also coming down the pipeline. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Next, we have Josh Cooperman.
Josh Cooperman. I live at 216 Griffith Street. I would like to thank Councilor Dickinson for suggesting a moratorium on new gasoline stations. It was a surprise for me. And I would like to thank City Council for considering a moratorium tonight. I fully support the moratorium on new gasoline stations as drafted by city staff and I urge City Council to adopt this moratorium as an emergency ordinance tonight. As City Council knows, I support a permanent prohibition on new gasoline stations in Louisville, and I hope that this moratorium will become such a prohibition either by council action or citizen initiative. As a representative of the citizen initiative currently circulating, I would appreciate having the moratorium in place while we gather signatures. There are many reasons to prohibit the development of new gasoline stations. Most importantly, the urgent need to mitigate climate change. As climate reports from earlier this year made ever more clear, new fossil fuel infrastructure is incompatible with holding global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, widely understood to be a critical upper threshold. For these reasons, I have been astounded that development applications for 2 new gasoline stations have come to the city in the less than 3 years since I have made Louisville my home. For these same reasons, I am also ashamed that members of our community would support these developments. Last week, the United Nations released another climate report aptly entitled The Closing Window and subtitled Climate Crisis Calls for Rapid Transformation of Societies. This report details how our inadequate climate action has put us on course for global warming of 2.5 degrees Celsius by the end of this century. Such a temperature increase would result in catastrophic climate breakdown. As a scientist and a father of 2 young girls, these predictions keep me up at night. Let us hope that our world leaders can make significant progress at next week's COP27 in Egypt. In the meantime, our local leaders can contribute to this desperately needed transformation by adopting the emergency moratorium before us tonight. The emergency that climate change has now become demands no less. The city's stated mission, right up there, to protect, preserve, and enhance the quality of life in our community, demands no less. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Emma Weber.
Hi, I'm Emma Weber. I live in Boulder, but I'm here because this topic doesn't only affect people in Louisville, it affects people all over our community. I believe that we need to ban the construction of new gas stations in Louisville because it's an important step towards creating the world that we need in order to prevent the worst of climate change and to prevent events like the Marshall Fire. My generation has more than enough fossil fuel infrastructure to clean up, and we do not need more gas stations just to transition away from them. We know from the science, and we are told time and time again, that we need to transition to clean energy and figure out how renewables can provide energy and to transition to electric car charging infrastructure. Again and again, our government vows to take action against climate change. Now is our chance. Now is our chance to prove that those are not just false promises. Now is our chance to create that change. Banning the construction of new gas stations in Louisville would be a significant step towards the action we need. The fossil fuel industry is by far the largest global emitter of greenhouse gases. To prevent the worst of climate change, we know that we need to end our fossil fuel dependency. We are in the midst of a possibility to reshape our systems, the same systems that we have built up only for them to break us down. If we don't take this opportunity, we are only adding to the list of chances our world has ignored that have put ourselves in this catastrophic situation. I'm part of my environmental club at our school, at my school in Boulder, Fairview High School, and we talk all the time about the need to transition away from fossil fuel infrastructure, and I hear this come up time and time and again, and we all know the science is there, people mentioned before me, and this is a chance that we can actually transition away from fossil fuels. And if we're building more gas stations, then we're doing the exact opposite of what the science tells us that we need to do. My generation has, like I mentioned, so much fossil fuel infrastructure that we already need to transition away from, and so much fossil fuel infrastructure that we're going to be left with and that we're going to be left to clean up. And all of this fossil fuel infrastructure and greenhouse gas emissions is what contributed to the Marshall Fire. We know from science that the Marshall Fire would not have been as severe, and it stemmed from climate change because of the dry grasses and climate before it happened. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, we have RJ Harrington.
Good evening again, council and neighbors. RJ Harrington, 457 East Raintree Court. It's tough to follow Emma and our youth, the father of 2 teenage children, and one of them votes, one of them does not yet. But ultimately, what it comes down to is business as usual can no longer be tolerated. The science is quite clear. Again, back to the full disclosure that Chris touched on earlier. My business, and I am involved in business, and so I appreciate businesses' contributions to our community, but my business is specifically focused on electric vehicle charging infrastructure. And we can see a lot of signs from a market perspective that indicates that this is not necessarily a good business move. Be that as it may, folks should be able to risk all of their capital, should they so desire, to make poor business decisions. My desire to comment in favor of ordinance number 1843, series 2022 as an emergency ordinance is because there is in fact a climate emergency. Although this city has not yet declared a climate emergency, Emma mentioned it, I'll mention it again, the Marshall Fire is evidence in our faces, in our backyards, in some people's not existent front and backyards any longer, that we are in the midst of a climate emergency. About 1% of the gargantuan fossil fuel industry's assets are investing in clean, renewable, safe energy productions. Now that's a teensy tiny tip, which is equivalent to the number of fossil fuel vehicles that are still on the road here in the state of Colorado, as was referenced earlier. Nevertheless, the times they are changing. Somebody sang that several decades ago, didn't they? And because of the climate crisis, because of the climate emergency, the International Energy Agency, no crazy institution, very conservative in the past, has basically come out and said $0 for additional fossil infrastructure, or else. They used a lot more words than or else. So again, this emergency moratorium is required. Business as usual can no longer support our habitable biosphere. We're already breathing toxic air. Our air quality suffers because of the frack fields to our east and northeast. We cannot allow new demand to impact that air quality and our habitable biosphere. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment on this topic tonight? I just need this to go away so I can see the online hands again. Thank you. All right, seeing none, we will have one more round of public comment later. Council discussion? Councilmember Most.
I guess I'll start. I want to thank everybody for speaking and really appreciate Emma speaking up for her generation. I think it's pathetic that we have to keep asking teenagers to come before us and make the case for why we should do the right thing. I don't think teenagers should have to do that. I think our teenagers have a lot of other things on their plate, and they're busy at school, and they should be busy at school and doing activities they love, not worrying about the future of the world. My 17-year-old daughter does regularly, and I see the stress on her, and I see the toll it takes. And I think it is really, for us to sit here and to have to be kind of shamed by teenagers is incredibly unfortunate. I really appreciate her speaking out. And I guess that we all saw what happened with the Marshall Fire. I think this council made a decision to not require people to build to 2021 codes, which I personally feel was a mistake. And I think this kind of decision-making, this kind of notion that making the transition to actually do what we need to do to create carbon neutral environment in this community beyond, to support clean energy. No matter when we decide to make that transition, it's going to be painful. And the truth is that pain has kept us for years and decades from making those decisions, because nobody wants to make the decision because it's hard. Because no matter when we make the decision, there's going to be winners and losers. And I think it's time for the adults who step up to take responsibility in elected positions to understand that we don't have a choice anymore, right? The choice is to do the right thing, or to just, as Emma so clearly articulated, keep dumping more problems on the next generation, our children and our grandchildren. And so I understand there's all kinds of reasons why we shouldn't make choices like this. I understand that those have there are negative consequences for certain parties when we make these sort of decisions. But I personally believe we are well past the point where we have that luxury, and that we talk about sustainability, we talk about our commitment to it. And from my perspective, if we're really committed to sustainability and we really recognize there's a climate crisis, which I believe there is, that means every time we have the choice to do something about it, we need to do something about it. And no matter how painful that is, no matter how difficult that is, no matter the negative consequences for some organizations, businesses, individuals, that, just the fact that there are negative consequences is no longer an excuse that we can use. And so I just think that, initially when this moratorium came up, I was a little bit surprised about it. I had questions about the length of it. But when I hear the passion of the people that support this, and I think about, doing the right thing, it seems to me that the right thing is to pass this moratorium.
Thank you. I'm going to try to frame some points that I think we have to decide, and we'll have, people are welcome to say whatever they want. I'm not trying to cut off any discussion, but there are a few points I think we need to resolve because we've been presented with a menu of things we can do, ranging from nothing to something, and a lot of things in between. So some of the points I think we need to discuss is whether council wants to do this as an emergency ordinance, or whether we want to adopt an ordinance on first reading, if at all, or whether we want to pursue this at all. So that sort of question, I think, needs to be answered in people's comments and discussion, just, and I guess from my perspective, we have one application that has entered, that people have questions about and things like that. So from my perspective, the point of an ordinance like this would be to do it as an emergency, so there's not a second and a third and a fourth and a fifth and a sixth. So I'm just adding my comments to, I would understand why we would do it as an emergency. And the other section that I think I've heard a variety of perspectives around is section 2 of the emergency ordinance, whether or not to include the words building permit. So those are two things that I distinctly feel like we need to have some debate about and understand where people fall. And ultimately, we need to figure out where the majority of the body wants to go altogether. But I think by answering those two questions, we might be able to get there in some orderly fashion. Councilmember Dickinson.
So a question I would have is, because I don't want to be caught unawares, if we were to eliminate the building permit aspect, are there places around the city in which the very first action would be the building permit? Where this moratorium, I don't want to pick a particular address, right? But an address we're not speaking of would be the first action would be the building permit.
Not that I'm aware of. I believe all new, I'm not aware of any properties where a gas station could go in without a land use PUD application having to come in first.
Thanks. That just helps me kind of, the question you're asking around how I feel about that. I think I could support that aspect of eliminating that verbiage so that, yeah, anything that begins tomorrow would face this moratorium.
Other folks? Councilmember Fahey.
I have kind of the same question. So if we do an emergency ordinance, it would prevent anybody until the end of September, anybody from putting in any kind of application for a new gas station, but one that presumably has already been submitted would be past that acceptance, right? So they wouldn't be subject to the moratorium?
That's right. If the building permit is removed from section 2,
Okay,
and it's just the land use applications, then the answer
Okay.
would be yes.
thank you.
Other council members have comments or want to further the discussion? Or have questions? Mayor Pro Tem Maloney. Called you everything. Senator Maloney.
I'm waiting for the next promotions. Thank you, Mayor. I think it's important, I'm going to reiterate the comments that I made 2 weeks ago. When the idea of an emergency ordinance came up, my objection at that time, and it is today, is that we're doing this so quickly, we're not having what I believe is sufficient conversation with the community. So if somebody missed this week, they didn't get the opportunity to know that we were going to have this discussion. So I do think we all agree with the perspective on reducing greenhouse gases. So if anybody has any other perspective on that, I spoke to that earlier tonight. And the question would be, if we add gas stations in Louisville, does that increase the amount of gas people buy in Louisville? Does it really increase the amount of greenhouse gases? Not that I'm advocating a lot more. What if we had 20 gas stations in Louisville? Does it make an impact on how much gas that I buy? No. An example I use with some of my colleagues is, well, if you increase the number of sweet cows in the city, it would definitely increase the amount of ice cream I would eat. But I'm not going to buy more gasoline. It's not going to affect that aspect of it. So do we need to get away from fossil fuels? Absolutely. And where I'm going with this is, I would like to have more of a discussion without this panic of saying we absolutely have to do an emergency ordinance. It's not that I disagree with the perspective, but I want to be fully informed. Councilor Dickinson and I both asked clarifying questions of, the attorney and the director of community development. I think there's other questions we would have over time. So if we do it tonight or if we do it in January, does it really make any difference? And, do we expect, somebody's going to rush in with the land use development and somehow we're going to not take that in consideration? I don't think so. So that was why I voted no on what we are discussing tonight as an emergency ordinance. I'm not saying no to the concept, but I want to understand it fully and legislate something with the community being involved in discussion at a level where we understand what we're doing. But I absolutely agree with R.J. Harrington. Yes, we have a climate emergency. What are the things that we can do as a city that make a difference? And on consent agenda, we had something talking about city facilities. And I look at some of the large facilities we have, like the rec center. can we make a difference there? I believe so. You know, and so that's where I'm at with this. I do pause under the pressure that we have to do this as an emergency. And I also believe that a land use item that's out there with its building permit should be honored because, you know, they started that probably in 2020 or early, you know, 2021. I don't know the exact dates, but that was based upon, you know, permitted use in areas, and that's something that should be considered as a quasi-judicial issue, and everybody deserves due process. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Lay.
Thank you, Mayor. Um, I, um, I raised a couple of issues the last time relating really to process. I was, we did, as I recall, we talked about this for the very first time at the very end of the meeting during council comments, which is usually a time when we do things like ask for items to be put on the agenda. Um, I continue to wonder whether, not wonder, I think we went beyond the agenda that night. But that's sort of water under the bridge, I guess. But it still troubles me that we did that. I think I agree with Mayor Pro Tem in terms of trying to get some handle on why it is that we should pass an emergency ordinance. I want to clarify one thing. How many, this is maybe a question for either the clerk or the city attorney, but I thought, or I think, that emergency ordinances require a 2/3 vote. Is that right?
Yes, that is. It requires a supermajority.
And you know, I understand. I mean, I think there's a distinction to be made between the climate emergency, which we are definitely a part of, and whether we need to pass a moratorium without any discussion about something that's pretty important, which is, I think, whether the moratorium serves the interests that are being discussed. I think one comment that had been made is that a new gas station is going to create new demand. Well, I don't know that. I haven't heard anything by that. Or anything to demonstrate that may be true. I don't know, but I don't know that it is. I am also a little troubled that something that was a use by right and has been a use by right for a long time has not been sort of previously challenged on an emergency basis. I am concerned that this the emergency was precipitated by the initiative, and 8 hours later, it's being proposed at the end of a meeting off agenda. But these are procedural concerns, and I understand the need. The result is what a lot of people are very concerned about. We want to reduce our reliance on fossil fuels. There's no argument to that. We're all on record on that. But does this do that? I don't know, but I certainly don't think it's appropriate to make that kind of decision and establish a moratorium that's going to be in effect for nearly a year without additional information. There is language in each of these two different ordinances which refers to the status quo, preserving the status quo. And I think, as I understand it, sort of the proponents of the measure think of the status quo as freezing the number of stations. What I think though is it's not free, it is changing the status quo with respect to the ordinances. And it troubles me. And I think this is part of the concern that I have about how this is an emergency. Is this came up as we were getting closer to a quasi judicial proceeding on an existing application, and we are changing the rules in the middle of this. And I just I think if we are going to run, I just don't think it's a very good way of governing ourselves if we are going to start creating, as I think we could, all kinds of moratoria that are going to affect existing applications. Because I just don't understand where this process leads us. It strikes me that at the very least, we ought to have a regular ordinance with a first reading and a second reading. And I think we shouldn't do what I feel like we may be doing if we pass this, which is, verging on special legislation to prevent one party that's identified from doing something, which we can't really talk about. We could, I think, deal with that once the quasi judicial proceeding is over. But I'm a little bit troubled by the changing of the status quo in terms of the rules we're applying. I don't know. I think that the signal that sends is that we're not going to follow our own rules. And I am concerned by that. I think if we do go down that road of doing a moratorium anyway, which may happen, I don't know, I guess we'll see. I don't think that moratorium needs to go until September 23rd, 2023. I think if it's so important and such an emergency, it seems to me that we ought to address it beyond that. I would move it back till January 23rd or something like that, and put it in concert with our work plan. But anyway, I'm just concerned. I am very concerned about the process that we're going through, because I don't know that it has any limiting principle to it. And I just don't know that this is the way we're really supposed to govern. And I do, at the same time, I think the issue is really important, and I think it's something we need to talk about. I just think that we can do that better if we're not rushed through one hearing tonight on that we have a little bit more time to consider this as a regular ordinance, which I think it probably should have been proposed 2 weeks ago, if it was proposed at all. So those are my comments.
Thanks, Councilmember Lay. I'll add my comments, I suppose, at this point. And I guess I just have a decidedly different perspective than you on the facts of a number of the issues that you raised. So I'll just share my perspective and maybe ask some questions so we can ascertain, like, from a factual perspective, where we're disagreeing, and maybe get over some of those things. But one comment that you made that brought me a great deal of concern is that you're concerned that we went outside the scope of the agenda setting at the end of the last meeting. And I suppose I'm surprised that you didn't raise it at that point. And I was very careful during that point in the meeting to instruct people to just decide whether we wanted to agenda this so we could talk about this matter tonight. To the point that I even didn't know until I asked Councilmember Dickinson at the public meeting today if he knew about the initiative, like what his intention was, what he wanted to discuss. He just told us all, and I noticed surprise on everyone's face. So he said, I would like to put this on an agenda so we can discuss it. And I didn't hear any discussion, and so that concerned me greatly. And I would just encourage everyone, if you feel that we're going outside an agenda topic, to raise it at that point, because we all can put an end to that at that point. And we do agenda things by consensus, so we have to vote to add it to the work plan or the agenda so that one person of the group's not controlling the agenda. So I feel very much that we followed our public process and open meetings law, and I'm concerned to hear that issue raised. I guess I'll just do one at a time since I see your hand up, Councilmember Lay. You're muted. You're still muted.
Chris, you're muted.
If you want to raise them all, that's fine. I can raise them, or I did raise this, Mayor. I did raise it at the time. I said we were way outside the scope of what we were doing. Why were we raising this? So that I think is pretty clear.
Boy, I sure disagree with you. I feel, anyway, I'll just make my comments. We don't need to have a back and forth. I don't think that's necessarily productive. And then when we come to comments, you can make your comments. I don't think arguing back and I do think having different perspectives heard is really important. But, you know, from my perspective, we absolutely did not get into the substance of whether or not we should have a moratorium. We talked about whether we should have the discussion tonight, and here we are having the discussion. So I believe this is a duly noticed meeting, and we have options of whether to do it as an emergency or as a first reading so that council can have that discussion tonight and make that decision. So I'm thankful for having all the options available so we can have the discussion in public that we're having now and decide that. Another area that I just feel that I need to raise, a lot of times people send emails in or council members say the phrase by right, this is entitled or by right, and I feel that there's a misuse of the phrase by right and entitlement oftentimes. Gasoline service station, it is not just a yes in any zone district. It has a special review. In every case, like no one can just go pull a building permit and build a gasoline service station. And so the use of the words by right and entitlement, I don't believe are being accurately used in many cases, and it concerns me when council members imply that we're taking away something that is guaranteed by right when that's not the case and there's a process. I do think it's a very fair process and transparent process. And the other thing I heard that causes me concern is any implication that an application that's already been taken in would be altered. So people who have submitted, let's say we were talking tonight about a moratorium on something else. Let's say it's a moratorium on grocery stores. If there's a grocery store application in the queue, that would be the rules that the planning staff would review it under are the rules that are on the books when they submit the application. That doesn't entitle anyone to anything beyond application review, but they are entitled the fair application review under those rules, and that's what we would do. But if during that time we changed the building permitting requirements so that the 2021 code had to be in effect, when you pull your building permit, that's when the building code regulations get pulled. And that's the version of the building code that you'll be held to, is when you pull your building code. So there are these timing triggers, and no one will be second guessed once they submit under the rules for the stage of the process that they're in. So I guess I have a very different perspective than what's been conveyed from others. And I think there's a very specific point to what Councilmember Dickinson, what I believe Councilmember Dickinson had proposed agendaing, that he was hoping to put a pause so we could have this bigger community discussion. And I think that's exactly the appropriate use of an emergency moratorium, that if you say to people, we're going to talk about this in 60 days, then anybody who is considering potentially submitting something is going to submit something in the next 60 days. So we'll get 15 applications just so that they're in before the moratorium goes into effect. So I do think that this fits the definition of an emergency moratorium and is an appropriate use of that kind of a tool. I'll be interested to hear whether people want to do it or not. And then I guess why I asked my question, just to add my comments so I don't have to come back to me. I asked my question to Councilmember Dickinson to his, what he was hoping to do. It was along the lines of Councilmember Lay's question of 2/3, and that's because, I was counting to 5 in my head. And so I understand there's likely to be a split vote on this and different perspectives, and so I am trying to work toward what I think a consensus, or at least a 5-vote group of people could get to so that we can pass something, or a clear 3, no, we're not going to do anything, so that we can move on one way or another. So that was the point of my asking the question, to see if there's something that we can reach agreement on, and if there's not, we'll just move on. It's no hard feelings. We can have different perspectives, and we can fiercely debate the issue, but we just need to understand where people are coming from so we can, and make sure everybody clearly understands the issues. That's the other thing that's really important. So those are my points. Councilmember Dickinson?
Thank you, Mayor. I think I have a pencil and paper, and then I didn't write my note down. Right? So I'll try to remember. Yeah, I think one of the other questions I have, just from a process perspective, is say tonight we pass a moratorium, and then I know this isn't part of my question. Next week, we create an ordinance that we all agree upon around gas stations. Then the moratorium is lifted, right? So like if in a month or 3 months or 5 months we create something new, the moratorium is automatically lifted, or we could lift the moratorium later. Like, so if we put a moratorium in place for a year and then we make a substantive decision on the regulation 3 months from now, the moratorium obviously doesn't continue on past that, right? How does that process work?
The council can, by ordinance, lift the moratorium at any time before the expiration date.
Okay.
In your scenario, if we had an ordinance to bring back next week, we would include a section in there that upon the ordinance becoming effective, that the moratorium would terminate.
Okay, that's helpful. Yeah, and again, I feel a special guilt or duty, like Pandora's box. This is fun, right? This is me. I did this. And I think, what I did want to, Councilmember Lay's point and Mayor Pro Tem Maloney's point from a few weeks ago is again, there was a lot of concern over bringing a moratorium onto the agenda versus bringing a discussion about a moratorium onto the agenda, and which was the right process. And so I appreciate that frustration, and you did voice that a couple weeks ago. I think that again, from just a transparency perspective, like I own an electric car. I'm really proud of that. It was very expensive. It was worth it. I also own a 2015 Honda Odyssey minivan, which is not electric, and I plan to have that for a very long time because that's how I would function with a vehicle. So I am both invested in the electric vehicle market and also tied to a gas vehicle for hopefully quite a long time if it doesn't die. And if I were to make a drastic decision tomorrow and sell it, it's not going to go to the dump, or if you will, someone else is going to own it for hopefully a very long time. That car is going to be here for a while. And so I'm not trying to demonize gas stations with this suggestion. I need gas stations. I was doing a little calculation. I think in my 12 years back in town, I think I've been to a Louisville gas station a total of 20 times. Total. That's because I go to Costco, because I have a Costco membership and the gas is cheaper. So I just don't happen to shop for my gas in Louisville, but I'm part of the problem. I've filled up my tank probably 100 times at Costco. And for the next 10 years, I'll probably do it once a month for the next 10 years. I'm the problem. And the 97% of us that have a gas-powered vehicle are the problem. Gas stations are providing us the thing that we need for our problem. But as a consumer, my job is to drive my electric vehicle more than my gas vehicle, to buy an electric vehicle the next time I have an opportunity, if I can. That's my job as a consumer, is to limit my gas use in all the ways I can. And I would hope that the job of a developer or what have you is to limit oil and gas availability. And as we sit here on the dais, I feel like my job as a politician is to limit the continued use and production and availability of gasoline, and to make that more difficult, not easier, not more convenient. So it is. It's a pickle in the sense of it's very easy choice for me as a resident. I'm like, no, new gas stations. I love it, and we can talk more about why. As a politician, I think that I have some obligation in that direction. And then as we talk about this moratorium, again, my conflict is around process as well. That it's important that I'm fair to people who are in the system and following the rules and going through the process. So trying to thread that needle of all these conflicting passions, desires, and intentions and roles that I have in my community. So I propose this because it's important to me, and I think I'm just looking at you, Dennis, we need to be having this conversation. I'm comfortable having this conversation with a moratorium in place. I'm actually comfortable having this conversation with a first reading coming soon. I'm comfortable having this conversation in lots of different ways, but we need to be having this conversation, and we need to be having it now, and we need to avoid the of more and more gas stations, right? We don't need them. It's not that we don't need the ones we have cars. We don't need more, right? And so I'm battling with these different passions I have and these different roles I have. So I'm in one breath, Mayor, I apologize for opening Pandora's box. And the other breath, obviously, I'm happy that I have, and I want us to have this conversation. I am maybe more flexible than it would otherwise be perceived. I mean, I think, Kyle, you and I had a good conversation a couple weeks ago, and I think I said, hey, if my motion fails, I'm happy to take yours, right? I wasn't fixated on one approach. I just wanted some consensus around that we will have a conversation. So I'm flexible in the way we have it, but we need to continue to have it, and I believe it's urgent. So I know, Mayor, that's not entirely productive, but I want to make sure that my thoughts are out there. Thank you.
Councilmember Brown.
Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate it. First off, I want to start with sort of the premise that I've been bringing to council meetings on similar topics, which is think globally, act locally. This is one situation where we as a local community can lead. I personally have serious concerns about expanding our fossil fuel infrastructure in Louisville. I've said that before, and I've said it individually to residents. I absolutely agree that this is a climate crisis, and a climate crisis requires an emergency ordinance. I think I was struck by, I believe it was Ms. Myers who said that we're considering really our children's well-being, and that fossil fuels are dangerous for our community and our kids. I'm paraphrasing a little bit, and I couldn't agree more with that. It's important for us to do things that we can, that can reduce our carbon footprint and that reflect our values. We as a community have set certain limits on certain types of businesses. I'm thinking particularly marijuana, because it's consistent with our values. And this is another example where we as a community need to express our values. So I also want to point out that the environmental impacts of gas stations go well beyond just the climate emergency, which is significant enough in and of itself. But the number of brownfield sites that are petroleum impacted, particularly from the leakage of underground gasoline storage tanks, is astronomical. There's about 145,000, according to the EPA, across the country. And the more gas stations that we stand up in this community, the more likely we are to have contaminated sites, whether or not we have a moratorium or not. So that's where I am at right now with this, not only for the environmental impact of the climate, but also for our local community.
Any other comments from folks? All right, members of the public care to comment? This is the final round of public comment on this agenda topic this evening. Please fill out a sign-up card when you're finished talking, so we make sure we get your name in the record.
My name's David Spriggs. Thank you for taking the time to be here tonight and giving me an opportunity to speak. In full disclosure, I'm associated with the property for which there's an application in process. But tonight, I'm here to talk about the moratorium and putting in place a moratorium that impacts an existing application sends a bad message to businesses that are looking to invest in Louisville, because it weakens the merit of this current zoning, weakens the merit of the current planning process, and even weakens the merit of the Planning Commission approval. If you have an applicant that has gone and spent, a year or so going through the process, if you have an applicant that has gone through Planning Commission, and then right thereafter, there's a moratorium put in place, it appears to be targeted, and it really weakens the foundation of that process. And as a business owner, that would impact the way I looked at making investments into the community. I do understand the need to be a steward of the environment. I put solar power on my house, but I haven't imposed that on my neighbors. I'm vegan because of the impact on the environment, but I don't impose that on my family. I put solar power on one of the businesses that I'm associated with. We did that back in the mid-2000s before solar power was cool and before you got the rebates for it. But I didn't impose that on any of the other businesses. So, I think democracy is about compromise. Democracy is about majority rule with minority rights. Democracy is not about the ends justify the means. I think that's pretty dangerous. And I'd encourage this council to consider a compromise for this moratorium and really any future moratoriums on other uses that don't impact existing applicants and don't prevent them from getting their approvals, including their building permit approvals. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Seeing no other public comment, council discussion? Councilmember Fahey.
Thank you, Mayor. After a lot of consideration, I think everyone's aware of how strongly I am in support of climate issues. I am also in support of following procedures that I took an oath to uphold. And so I would like to propose that we have an emergency ordinance prohibiting new applications for gas stations within the city limits, but that any current people in the process are exempt, and that we'll continue this conversation as part of our work plan to see if that moratorium, if we permanently ban it or if we discuss what's going to happen. But I would like to not see any further applications come in until September or whenever we lift the moratorium.
So Councilmember Fahey, are you moving to approve ordinance number 1843 as an emergency ordinance, but striking the word building permit from section 2?
Yes.
And then I'll just clarify with the city attorney that accomplishes what Councilmember Fahey was stating she wanted to accomplish? Okay. Is there a second? And then we can have discussion. This doesn't end discussion.
Sure, I'll second.
All right. Councilmember Fahey, did you want to say anything else? Other folks have comments or questions? Mayor Pro Tem Maloney.
Thank you, Mayor. And I'm going to thank Councilor Brown for his comments. He used a marijuana ordinance that we passed about the number, and we did that over a course of 3 or 4 meetings. And so where I appreciate what Councilor Fahey has proposed, I would really like to see us do this in a very structured, I know it sounds ponderous, I know it doesn't sound like an emergency, but we can do this fairly quickly over the next several weeks and have discussions, because I think we all agree with the basic concept here, but what's the right number? Is the number we have today the correct number? Is it too many? Is it too few? I think we should explore all of those things, but we absolutely did that with the marijuana. And we said there's only a certain number, and we're at that number, and so there's essentially a moratorium on anybody else unless we, as a council, or unless there's a citizen referendum, change that. So I'm sounding like a broken record, but I would really like to see a lot more public process and something that actually, emergency ordinance, we don't have to do a notice. And I don't know how much notice, if we did any on this.
Was that a question?
No, it was not. I just read the ordinance on that. But I would like to see something that opens up more of a discussion and, where I respect the proposal, I don't think it gets us where I believe we need to be, even if the outcome turns out to be exactly the same.
Other folks have comments on the motion or other comments? Councilmember Brown.
Well, thank you, Mayor. I appreciate that, and I appreciate the comments of the Mayor Pro Tem. I think that this is a discussion that we've actually been having for many years. This council has considered previous applications for gas stations, and we've heard very similar comments. I think we've had debates about the best way to approach those, and I feel like this is the culmination, or at least the beginning of a new phase of the conversation that we're having about gas stations. And I think it's important to notice that a moratorium is a pause, and it allows us to have a conversation without, the continuation of some of this infrastructure being built.
Thanks. I'll speak in favor of Councilmember Fahey's motion. So one thing that I've continued to repeat and people continue to say alternative perspective is just that, the things that are in the queue there's a timeline. So if you submit to zoning, the zoning administrator is going to review it against the zoning that's in place when you submit. When you pull a building permit, the chief building official is going to review it against the building permits that are in place at the time. So Councilmember Fahey's proposed something to give someone that's in process additional rights beyond what they necessarily have by law. But I'm supporting her proposal so that the application's in process. There will be no concern for people that, something was done out of order. So I can be supportive of the compromise Councilmember Fahey's proposed. And I think what that does is allows us to have the conversation that Mayor Pro Tem Maloney is hoping to have, so that there are several opportunities for people to weigh in about whether this is an outright ban on any new things or not. It gives the community members time. If community members want to do an initiative petition, they can go that route. So I think it gives time for the conversation without getting any other specific individual caught up in the process feeling like it's targeted toward them, which in my opinion it is not. But I could understand why somebody might feel that way. So I think that this approach as an emergency ordinance keeps anyone else from feeling like they're caught up in this and that the rules are changing while they're in the process. So I think it's a good strategy, and I'm supportive of what Mayor Pro Tem Maloney said as well, of having a robust engagement process. I don't know what the timing of that looks like because we do have a lot going on right now. So I do think that has to go through the work plan process and understand, is that in January? Is that in February? We have a lot going on. I've gotten just between 5 and 6 when I got here, I had 43 new emails, and there's a lot of things going on in the community right now with people wanting us to look at fence codes and setbacks and heights and building materials and more new building codes. Like, there's just a lot going on right now. So I don't know what the timing looks like, and I would hope that it gets weighed against other things in the planning process. And that's why I think having the moratorium in place is good, so that we don't get a bunch of additional things in the queue. I guess that's all I'm saying that for. Mayor Pro Tem Maloney.
This is one of those things where I feel like we have a lot of agreement that this is something we need to address. So, however this plays out, we need to address it soon. I think we all understand and feel that. My opinion of format of that may be different than your opinion of format to that, but it doesn't change the sentiment that addressing this and making a decision is important. So however this comes out, I think we are more on the same page with the need to address this, maybe not the format or the process. So that shouldn't get in the way of us having effective and timely discussions. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Councilmember Lay?
Yeah, I want to kind of reiterate, I don't I don't know what the answer is here. I am very open and interested to hear more about whether we ought to, frankly, change the ordinance or what we ought to do. What my, if I I want to boil down what my real concern is here, because of something I don't know whether it was, I don't know who had talked about it, but I agree that there's a climate emergency. I think we have to think about how we govern the city and what process we use. I think this is an important issue. I'm not sure anybody else does, but I'm going to raise it because at any given time, there may be an important consideration that justifies ordinances to be passed on an emergency basis. And there is some check on that with the supermajority. That is important. But I guess I'm wondering, and I'm wondering whether climate action is, if it's going to justify an emergency ordinance here, is every ordinance that comes before council where there is a strong argument that it affects, directly responds to the climate crisis, going to come to us that way as an emergency ordinance. Maybe not because of the supermajority, but I think we need to think about, I mean, I think there are reasons to believe that we're going to start doing this more often. Now, maybe that's just what it ought to be, because climate crisis is real and important and people care about it. But as a matter of thinking about how we govern generally, I just don't think that having one hearing on that is really the right way to do it. So it's really, I think Mayor Pro Tem is correct in saying, I'm not sure we necessarily disagree about results or concerns. My concern is a process concern, and I just don't know what the limiting principle here is. I don't know what's going to prevent this from being the way we start doing business, not what I thought was the exception. And that's a rhetorical question, but I think it's a serious one, and I have my concerns. At the same time, I really do appreciate Councilmember Fahey's trying to offer compromise. I think that's a really important piece of this, regardless of how we do it. But I think the other point that I would make is I don't think you pass a moratorium and say it's an emergency and then put off the discussion indefinitely. That to me is inconsistent. So I think that discussion, if this passes, ought to happen sooner rather than later. But thank you very much for, and it's been a pretty robust discussion, and I appreciate that from other council members.
Thank you, Councilmember Lee. So I'm not seeing any other folks. The only thing I think I just want to add about my perspective is the emergency. I believe there's a climate emergency. That's not what the basis of the emergency moratorium is. However, for me, it's that moratoriums are often adopted as emergency ordinances. And so I am not afraid of the concern that you've brought up around are we going to stop noticing ordinances the way we typically do for everything. I don't think that's valid. So like, for example, the last moratorium I remember is a moratorium for marijuana facilities, for commercial, for recreational marijuana facilities, which was adopted as an emergency moratorium, and then it took the council at least a year to talk about that. And I came to several hearings. It was 2012 or 2011. Maybe there's a more contemporary moratorium that City Clerk Muth can remember, but it took council many, many hearings to work out the details about that, where they would be, how many stores they would be, how, clustered they would be, all of that. And they were going in one direction, and then it took a turn, and they went a totally different direction. And so I do think that this is typical and has been a typical practice in our city and other cities. So I'm not concerned. And I do think the standard is that it's the moratorium that's triggering the need for the emergency and not the climate emergency, which does trigger the need for significant action, but I don't believe on its own would justify an emergency ordinance in this case. So that is my perspective on that topic. Any other final comments from folks? Councilmember Lay.
I appreciate that, Mayor, and it is the governing by moratorium that I'm talking about, and what the rationale for that is. Now, I agree. I mean, other ordinances may not be in that vein, but are we going to start doing moratoria while we consider changing rules that we have? If the rules are justified by any particular concern, we just happen to be, we are talking about climate issues right now. But what's to say that there won't be additional moratoria in the future? I'm not so sanguine about that, and I'm not sure. I mean, in any given one, there may be a good reason for it. I'm not saying that it's every time it shouldn't happen. I just am concerned that it's going to be a more prevalent way of how we do government here, and I just have misgivings about the process. That's all.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Any other comments from folks? All right. Did I see one? No. Let me just make sure I've done everything. Council questions and comments. All right, I'll close the public hearing, and I'll ask City Clerk Muth for a roll call vote on the motion. There's a question.
I just want to ask for a clarification. So we're voting on the version one of this? There were two versions?
Yeah, so the proposed motion was to adopt an emergency ordinance, removing the words building permit from section 2 to, I guess I'll turn it over to our city attorney to summarize
If you
the
can just
motion.
clarify.
Yes, and that is the motion. It essentially to enact a temporary moratorium by emergency, but it will not affect building permits. And there's actually a few other places that I'll remove building permit from the ordinance, but I understand the intent of the movement.
Is that clear, Councilmember Most? Yes. Is that clear to everyone else? Excellent. City Clerk Muth, could we please have a roll call vote on the motion?
Mayor Stolzman?
Yes.
Councilmember Brown?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Maloney?
No.
Councilmember Most?
Yes.
Councilmember Lay?
No.
Councilmember Fahey?
Yes.
Councilmember Dickinson?
Yes.
Thank you, everyone. The motion passes, and that takes us to our next agenda topic this evening, which is discussion direction of our proposed 2023 City of Louisville legislative agenda. We'll have a staff presentation from our deputy city.
May we take a break?
Oh, yes. Sounds great. I get on a roll.
Sorry, Deputy
We will
City
take
Manager.
a,
I could give my presentation.
we'll take a 10-minute break, so we'll be back at 8:03. 1 minute warning.
1 minute warning.
All right, thank you, everyone. Welcome back. Next on our agenda tonight is discussion direction of our proposed 2023 City of Louisville legislative agenda. We'll have a staff presentation from our Deputy City Manager, Megan Davis.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council. I'm here tonight to share with you the proposed legislative agenda for 2023. I have a very brief presentation, and I'll just give you a little background on the legislative agenda and its purpose, and then some of the highlights of the 2023 proposed agenda. So the city has completed a legislative agenda every year so that we have a document that reflects our priorities for state and federal legislative and administrative policy. You'll find it's largely focused on state legislative items. However, we do have some items that pertain to our federal priorities as well. It's really to inform our state legislators and particularly our delegation members about our policy priorities in advance of the legislative session. And it also serves as a roadmap for engagement for city council and for staff when bills come up or issues come up and people ask us if we have a position on it or if we want to weigh in on it. We have a roadmap that kind of tells us what you all have agreed to. It really helps us guide our engagement also with our state associations because we do participate in a number of organizations that also focus on legislation. So the way that we develop the legislative agenda is to look at the previous year and identify those items that are still relevant for the community, city council, and city departments. We also reflect on emerging issues that are being discussed by the legislature at the state and federal level, and any legislative actions that are necessary based on elections, ballot issues, or interim committees. And we also try to incorporate those items that have kind of risen up through some of our partner organizations that are specifically relevant to the city of Louisville. Organizations like DRCOG, Colorado Municipal League, Mayors and Commissioners Coalition, CC4CA, and the Metro Mayors Caucus. So the proposed legislative agenda for 2023 includes a lot of items from the previous year. We have removed positions that were addressed in the previous year and that we don't anticipate will emerge again this year. We added an entire section on disaster recovery and resiliency that's focused on issues that were identified during the Marshall Fire and since that time with our recovery. And then we've added issues that we anticipate will be addressed in the coming session that weren't already captured on the agenda. So some of the key issues that you'll find on the legislative agenda are insurance reform to address insurability and future disasters, wildfire mitigation resources, state action on gun safety, reinstatement or restoration of RTD transit services, which were cut during COVID, And then some areas around state investments to assist with municipal administrative issues like cybersecurity and municipal court data sharing. There are others that were added to the agenda. You'll see that in the packet we've included a red line of the previous, the 2022 legislative agenda, so you can see exactly what was added. And then we have a clean version as well. I will also just mention that we historically have done a legislative breakfast or some type of get-together with our delegation members. Usually we include the entire Boulder County legislative delegation, and we're working to schedule something yet this year or at the beginning of 2023. It's a little bit difficult during an election year like this because people are working kind of up till November and campaigning, and so it's kind of a tight window. So we will continue to work on a time that we can all get together with them so that we can discuss our priorities and also hear from them what they are going to be working on in the 2023 legislative session as well. So this evening, I'm asking City Council if you have any proposed changes to the policy areas or positions, and or if there are additional issues that you would like to incorporate into the legislative agenda. And we will take any comments that you have, we'll make the changes, and then we'll bring this back for final adoption on, I think it's on, it's coming up, December 6th. Yes, so we'll bring it back for your final adoption at that time. Happy to take any questions or comments.
Thank you. Any members of the public care to comment on this agenda item? Seeing none, council discussion. Any folks have comments? Mayor Pro Tem Maloney.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Deputy City Manager. Some of these are just editorial comments. On the section on community recovery and resiliency, talking about the insurance reforms, which I think are very, very important. I note that the sub-bullets under that particular bullet, the first one is reduces system-wide underinsurance, and then the next one are almost the by pieces. For example, it says improve transparency, eliminates the practice of this, that. So I'm just wondering, are those sort of nested correctly the way they're intended to be? Because, underinsurance is caused by purchasing less than you need for a full recovery of your asset. And it seems like you're covering that with the other ones because someone might choose to insure for, say, 2/3 of the value of an asset, knowing that there's some level of risk because it's either that's what they choose to afford or what they can't afford.
If it's okay if I weigh in a bit and then maybe.
Yeah, I just wanted to.
Yeah, so if these bullet points came from the work Mark Lasis and I, Mayor Pro Tem Mark Lasis and I did to submit items to CML to take up on insurance, and this is the way CML adopted it. And so I think that they're not nested. Each thing individually stands on its own, and so some of them could be nested under one another, but there may be legislation on just pieces of it. So there might be legislation that's not intended to reduce underinsurance, but does intend to improve transparency. And the most likely legislation I know about at this point is likely to explore availability issues because there are 2 places in the state where you can't get insurance. So that's where it came from.
Yeah.
We can nest it however we want in this document, but I think it would be good to support what Superior and us submitted to CML.
Well, I absolutely support what we submitted to CML. I just want to make sure it sort of hits the intended target. Now, I mean, I know people that will not do 100% insurance on their home because they, in their opinion, see the risk of that happening being very low. So they're willing to assume some level of risk because an average house fire is in the kitchen or the garage and doesn't burn the foundation like the 500 homes we saw here. That's why I was kind of asking that question. The bullets below the first one are very much action-oriented. I think that what we've seen in the insurance industry is some of the agents are underbidding another agent, even within the same companies, not really being clear that they're providing less insurance. So those practices I would absolutely like to see addressed. So that's kind of my point. So as long as the intention's there, all you have to do is say the intention's there, I'll be okay with it.
Yes, I believe the intention's there, and I should mention that in some of these cases, the positions are written very specifically, and in others, we've written them sort of broadly so that we have the ability to have flexibility depending on what comes up, because we never know exactly what language or how the issues are going to be crafted.
Great. I did fail at the beginning to thank you for your work on this, and, you know, I think this is a very important document, and it's something that really does guide everything, and, what was noted is it looks at our work plan, it looks at the strategic plan, and those are things that have been strengthened over the last several years, and I think it's very important that everything, have that level of alignment. The other comment I had, and it gets down to, it's under the section under public safety, public health and safety, and it's a addition that I requested was really about the gun ordinances. Do you believe what is in here, if adopted by the legislators and signed by the governor, would replace the need for our ordinances that we passed earlier this year, last year? This year.
We drafted that pretty broadly because obviously the state does have some measures in place, but we put in some ordinances that were much more specific. And so I think if the state, Kathleen may be able to respond to this better, but I think they could potentially do something very specific that mirrored what we did locally, which, but right now there's the ability in place for us to put our own more restrictive measures in place. So this is very non-specific, and I think is written as such because we don't know if they would do something, around open carry, for example, that was more of a statewide ordinance or something like that. And I think it would just depend what it would be and how it would be consistent or not be consistent with what we put in place locally.
Okay,
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Going down the line, Councilmember Brown.
Thanks, Mayor. Really, I think this is a very bold document. I think it's great. I think it really reflects our values as a city, our values as our citizens. In particular, I'm really excited about the whole section on insurance reform. I really appreciate the mayor's work with CML and with Superior, and to city staff for crafting that section. Obviously, I think folks know that affordable health care is important to me, and I appreciate that remains in this document. And I also appreciate the addition of the gun violence language, because I think that's obviously something that this community and this council has made a strong stand on. So thank you very much.
Councilmember Most.
One thing I don't see in here that I think I'd like to see in here is affordable housing.
We do have a position on affordable housing in the land use and development and revitalization.
Did I miss it? Okay.
It says the city supports increased local government funding for the statewide
Oh,
expansion
okay.
of affordable housing.
I didn't see it. I missed
Okay.
that one. Great, perfect, thank
Yep.
you. And then the second thing is something near and dear to my heart that I really makes me sad and makes my head explode at the same time, is this idea that we're ever going to get a train on those railroad tracks. Because I just think it's delusional. I think it was delusional from the beginning. It's a goddamn freight train with one track. If you want commuter rail, you got to have two tracks. So I think perpetuating this fantasy that we're ever going to get rail on there, from my perspective, is not useful. And so the question I have is, what should we be advocating for in the place of something that is never going to happen? And I don't know what the answer is, and I'm open to suggestion, and I just think it's sort of like this leftover thing that we're hanging on to because it was something we were promised that was never going to happen. And I know, I don't know if the mayor probably has something to say about that.
So the bullet you're talking about in our position is the city supports funding, construction, operation of Northwest Rail Line and the Front Range Passenger Rail Line to expand multimodal transportation in the Northwest Metro region. The city also supports ensuring rail service along the line includes stops in Louisville, supporting the much delayed obligation of RTD for transit investment in our community. I'm supportive of leaving this statement in there. The Front Range Passenger Commission was just made last year, And it would be a high-speed train that goes from Pueblo to Fort Collins. And I think having the position in there helps us to advocate to have a stop on the line, because if we're not at the table with that position, then the potential for having a train coming through the town that doesn't stop in our town is out there, and being part of a taxing district, an additional taxing district that pays for said train. So I think that's sort of like the worst case dystopian possibility, is that this high-speed train comes through town, it doesn't stop, and we pay for it. So I think we want to say we're in favor of completing the obligation, and part of why I think we want to leave it like it is that our residents and business people and have been paying this tax since 2009. Is that approximately when Fast Tracks was passed? So like there is a capital project that we've been paying into, and that there's an obligation to pay. So there has to be to get to a place where you are, I feel like there has to be a conversation about how to break up appropriately and how to be compensated for the revenue that we've paid in. So I like the statement as it's written because it keeps us at the table. It keeps us saying we want to stop. And if there is a conversation about terminating it, there would have to be a serious conversation about how the payment would be made and what that would go toward, or how we just break up altogether. So I would leave it as is.
I would, I think that's well stated, Mayor, and I would just add that, you'll also notice that many of our transportation positions include, our desire to have more transit, and that's not only, connected with our sustainability goals, but also with our equity goals here as a community. And we know that there are challenges with our current transit provider, and so a lot of the work that we do on the legislative front is to actually work to enhance their ability to be able to provide transit even during what we've had as very difficult conditions and financial conditions.
And I would say it's not all doom and gloom. It's not like there's any plan where we say this is how we get there, but Amtrak has shown significant interest in our line when we've lobbied in Washington, D.C. They have ranked the corridors that they want to expand into, and they've said ours is in the top 3 corridors in the entire U.S. that they're interested in expanding to. And so I think there are reasons to be interested in staying at the table and engaged in the conversation.
So my understanding with that the high-speed rail line is they were talking about taking that further.
There's 3 routes,
Okay.
and the politics likely favor our line.
So what you're saying to me then is that this language positions us in the strongest way to leverage whatever rail developments happen in our area.
I think this language enables our deputy city manager to be able to continue to advocate for funding for transit in our area. And then when there are, like right now, staff are doing a technical exercise looking at station areas for Northwest Rail. So it keeps us in the conversation for those, rather than saying, oh no, we don't want it.
Well,
So it keeps us
Okay.
relevant in the conversation, and the staff can say, yep, our position is that we're supportive of the line and we want to stop in our city.
All right, I'll defer then. Thanks.
I apologize for the back and forth and for dominating the conversation. I have sat in a lot of transit meetings. Are there other folks that have an opinion on that section explicitly that wanted to weigh in? Mayor Pro Tem Maloney.
Well, I share both of your opinions. Is heavy rail the solution? I'm not sure it is, but a solution that addresses the transportation needs absolutely needs to be on the table. And this is our leverage point. We've been paying taxes since, 2004? That's a long time. That's 18 years. So we should have leverage asking for a solution to serve the needs of, our community. Thank you, Mayor, for your work on this.
Other comments in general? It doesn't have to be focused on this. Councilmember Fahey.
Thank you. Yes, I just wanted to mention, I was going to say this at the end during public comments on my report on commuting solutions, but they are in the process of developing what they're calling the Northwest Regional Transportation Demand Management Plan, which they're hoping to finalize by the end of 2022. And so that's part of their discussion, and they're very invested in getting some kind of transit train through here, so.
Thank you, Councilmember Fahey. Other comments on the agenda? Councilmember Lay.
Thanks, Mayor. A couple of things. One, absolutely agree with you about the need to support the heavy rail piece and to keep ourselves in the middle of that. That's what, that's what we had wanted and paid for and continue to pay for. And so I totally agree with you there. And I actually want to applaud you and your efforts to help put this together, as well as staff, because I know you work closely with Mark on it, and I think it's good, it's solid, and I appreciate your work there.
Other folks, the other thing I would just add, it looked like we're going to try to schedule something in December, like Deputy, I can't think of anyone's names or titles tonight, it's just crazy. Anyway, like Deputy City Manager Megan Davis was saying, and so if folks could try to be flexible on our end with our schedules when that comes out, that's helpful, because some of the people we're trying to schedule with are really hard to accommodate. So just try our best to move around to meet their timeframes. Thank you. Anything else? All right, when this comes back, it will be on consent agenda, and people can always take it off, but that's where we'll likely see it. And there are a few typos, so if you see any, just email staff, and I'm sure we'll get those sorted. All right, thank you, everyone. Our next topic is discussion, direction, action, board and commission application review process. I'll turn it over to our city clerk, Meredith Muth, for a presentation.
Good evening, everyone. So the current application season is open for people applying for boards and commissions. That deadline is November 10th. The process you've used the last couple of years is to appoint a subcommittee to look at all the applications and review them before it comes back to you for a recommendation on who to interview. So that's a process you could use. You could do something different, but this evening, my request of you is to decide what process you'd like to use for that, so we can set things up moving forward, so that once the applications close on the 10th, we can start down that road.
Thank you so much. So has everyone been on for one of these before? No one is confused what we're talking about tonight. We've all done this. So are people generally in favor of continuing to have a subcommittee that will be noticed, so everybody can go to the meeting if they wanted to, but 2 members would be like the responsible parties that would do the work? And then I see a lot of nodding. Does anybody disagree with having a subcommittee that will do the initial review that'll come back to the whole body? Great, so everyone's supportive of that. 2 people have expressed interest so far. Others of you might be interested also, so please don't let this slow you down, but I heard Mayor Pro Tem Maloney had interest, and Councilmember Most has interest on being on the subcommittee. Are there other people that want to toss their hat in the ring? And of course, everybody can go to the meeting, and all the members of the public can go, and all the applicants can go. So if I could get a motion from someone to set a subcommittee as Mayor Pro Tem Maloney and Councilmember Most.
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Excellent. Is there any discussion of the motion and the process? Our Councilmember Lay.
Yeah, just have a question about it. And I honestly can't remember how we've done this in the past. If council members, we've deferred to a great extent to the 2 council members who go through the applications. But I'm trying to remember what our general, do we have a kind of process if somebody either disagrees with the choices that were made by that august group of 2, or for consideration of somebody who perhaps wasn't on first list.
Thanks, Councilmember Lay. So this is sort of a hybrid of what we've done in the past and what I would recommend that we do, but they'll bring forward a list of applicants that they recommend the council just automatically appoint. or, that they would be carried through. And more specifically, they're recommending a list of applicants they want to interview. And then council will make all the appointments at once, like with a formal action. And so if there's somebody that you think we should interview that's not listed as someone to interview, when they bring that list back, and it will likely be on consent agenda as a list of people to schedule interviews with, then just pull it off consent agenda, and we can say we'd like to add some interviews, and we've been pretty accommodating of one another in the past. And I think the things to keep in mind is, like, if we have, the reason why we have done this process, just for folks watching at home, is that some years we have had so many applicants that we've had to shrink the interview time down substantially to where it's like 2 minutes of an interview. So it doesn't feel like much of an interview and have much meaning, whereas the written application has a lot of content. And in other years, we've gotten vacancies where only one person applies and there's one position and they're wonderfully suited. So in those two scenarios, like, if you're doing too many interviews, you're not getting a meaningful interview. And in some cases, it's just from the written information, it's really abundantly clear that the person's an excellent candidate and you don't need to have the additional interview. Although we would love to meet with everybody. I know Councilmember Dickinson, when he first got on, was like, we should meet with everybody, and we would all love to, but there's just 24 hours in a day. So I think what we ought to do is have the subcommittee recommend to the group who we ought to interview. And if anybody objects, just go ahead and pull it off consent, and we can add additional interviews. I just was waiting for movement from Councilmember Lay. Does that seem like that clarifies what we might do, and does that sound okay to you?
Sorry about that. No, I appreciate your clarification, and that sounds just fine to me. Good work.
Mayor Pro Tem Maloney.
Well, I just want to add that we have at times proposed interviewing. So we have used the interview time when, if you look at the commissions, for example, that's a place where we may want to interview people to make sure we get the best fit for those particular positions. So that's part of this process, and we can do that. And we actually have a date set aside to do that, which is December the 13th, if we choose to use that. And we didn't last year, but the previous year we did, for example.
We did some video interviews last year, didn't we?
Yeah, we did.
And
Neither here nor there.
yeah,
Councilmember
and I'll just
Dickinson.
add, Chris, last year, Dennis and I were on the subcommittee, and our recommendations were not the final list, right? Or even our recommendations for interview wasn't the final thing. So it's a first round where those two people do the deep dive and make the recommendations, but clearly that can change based on council desires.
All right, any other discussion on this? And Councilmember Lay.
Yeah, just one comment, and I think this may be a sort of an overall thought as we go through this. Just hearkening back to the report of the DEI task force that we received last year. I just encourage the two who are going through these applications to take a look back at those recommendations and consider them as you're going through the first cut. And I hope that we will be flexible enough in our interviewing schedule and the way we're doing the interviewing to make sure everybody who we think should have an interview gets to be able to do it in a form that is, consistent with some of the constraints that they may have for a whole host of reasons, childcare, working at different times of the day, that kind of stuff. I think we've done that in the past, but I think it probably bears some repeating, and I know that those are good things to be thinking about.
Thank you, Councilmember Lay. And on that same note, I know our city clerk has done some work to advertise the openings in some, to try to reach audiences that don't always read our e-blasts and things like that. So including things like sending it out to Kestrel Housing and things like that to try to get more people involved in the process and applying. And on that same note, if everybody on council makes an effort to encourage people to apply, that always is really good so that we get more candidates from all over town and all different backgrounds. Anything else, Mayor Pro Tem Maloney?
In that regard, at the Ward 3 meeting, Councilor Brown wouldn't let people leave the meeting until they applied for a border commission. So
That's excellent. We should all follow the lead of the Ward 3 council members. All right, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you, everyone. And that takes us to our next agenda topic this evening, which is ordinance number 1844, series 2022, an ordinance amending the Louisville Municipal Code to establish an exemption from the city's sales and use tax for carryout bag fees enacted by the state of Colorado. This is our first reading, and we'll set the public hearing for November 15th, 2022. I move that. Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion of the first reading? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you, everyone. That takes us to our city attorney's report.
Thank you, Mayor. I have no report.
Thank you. That takes us to council comments, committee reports, and identification of future agenda items. I just have to make a correction from my original comment. It's November 14th for the Spark. I was able to pull it up during the meeting, so I apologize for the wrong date. But that's the night of the concert, is the 14th. Any other folks have committee reports or future agenda items? Councilmember Fahey.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, I have a report from Commuting Solutions. They have a couple of things that are relevant to tonight's discussions. One is that they're proposing that the communities surrounding Boulder, the city of Boulder, participate in the Bee Cycling bike share program. And because the city of Boulder is already starting this bike share program, and if we get like Louisville, Lafayette, Superior, whatever, we can make it a regional program, and then that would help with first and final mile for transportation issues. The second thing is the Northwest Regional Transportation Demand Management Plan that they were going to finish by the end of this year. We'll be interested in seeing what they come up with for that. Then also their annual membership meeting is December 7th at 9 o'clock at First Bank in Broomfield. And January 5th is the Northwest MCC and Commuting Solutions Legislative Breakfast, also relevant to tonight's conversation. So that's it.
Thank you. Councilmember Dickinson, new agenda topics?
Yeah. Dennis, it's okay. Yeah. I'm trying to come up with something on the fly. It's a good way to do things. I just wanted to mention that we had the business forum last Thursday. I want to thank the mayor and Rob and Jeff and Austin for being on the panel. And obviously our Congressman Joe Neguse for attending. I thought it was a really well done event. I thought staff did an amazing job and Ascend Church did an amazing job setting up the venue and creating a good environment for a lot of great dialogue and conversation. And it was not without its bumps. But I thought in the end it was a good conversation, got some good feedback from people. And one of my favorite pieces of feedback at the end of the night was someone who wanted to ask a lot of questions at our last forum and was really excited to ask some questions at this one. And when it came to audience questions, like, well, you kind of asked all the questions that I had, so I didn't have any questions. I'm like, oh, good. Well, I'm glad you got your questions answered, even though you didn't ask them. So I thought that went well. And then just want to piggyback, City Manager Jeff Durbin brought it up at the beginning of the meeting, but on Saturday, November 19th at LMS is the First Responder Appreciation Event, Police versus Fire Dodgeball Tournament. Should be really fun and engaging and a really good time. And so I hope that people can attend just for the fun of attending. It's, BYO chair, so come and hang out and watch them compete and have a good time.
Thank you. Councilmember Most.
Very quickly, I just wanted to thank Councilmember Dickinson for his moderation of the event, bumps and all. there were some challenges, and I think you handled it with a lot of grace. So just wanted to say that.
Other committee reports or future agenda topics? Councilmember Brown.
Thank you, Mayor. I just have a quick kind of sad note tonight. Colorado lost earlier today a very dedicated and important public servant. Marguerite Salazar died earlier today. She was the former insurance commissioner. She affected a lot of people's lives. She was the regional HHS secretary and was appointed by Barack Obama to that role in 2010. She was a kind of a groundbreaking member of her community, and she was from the San Luis Valley area, but she deeply affected people all across the state, including in Louisville. She was a very good friend of mine, and I am very sad to see her pass. So I'm going to be keeping her and her family in my thoughts and in my heart today and in the future, and just hope everyone will kind of join me in honoring her legacy as a true public servant who did a lot for Colorado.
Thank you, Councilmember Brown. Mayor Pro Tem Maloney.
Thank you, Council Brown, for sharing that. I have two committee reports. The Finance Committee, because of the Thanksgiving week, that meeting is scheduled for Monday, November the 28th. The agenda for that will be out soon. And the next thing is we had the Street Fair Committee meeting this afternoon. We had a very successful street fair this year. If you recall, the agreement, let's see, that's a 3-year agreement, I think. So we would have approved it a couple of years ago. Part of that was that there would be revenue sharing if we met certain goals. And so the street fair will be crediting back to the city $15,000 because of the success of that program in 2022. And so we're already working on 2023, and so it's going very well. And I think the agreement we crafted that we share in the success of that is something that's important for the long term. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Anything else from folks? Councilmember Lay.
Just wanted to encourage people to get out and vote before next Tuesday, and we've got drop boxes around. I can't electioneer, I guess, on the dais here, but please vote for all of the what they call the down ballot people on the ballot, and go team.
Any other comments from folks? All right, seeing none, we are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.